Prologue, the teenage girl who invented a monster. Welcome. I am Melesias. Before we step into the frozen Arctic, before we meet the creature and his tormented creator, we must travel back to a single, dark, and stormy night in the summer of 1816. It was the year without a summer. A volcanic eruption on the other side of the world had filled the atmosphere with ash, blotting out the sun across Europe. Crops failed. People starved. And in a luxurious villa on the shores of Lake Geneva, a group of brilliant, bored young writers were trapped indoors, the rain lashing against the windows. Among them were the poets Lord Byron and Percy Bysshe Shelley. And there was an 18-year-old girl named Mary. They were all intellectuals, fascinated by the latest scientific experiments. They debated the nature of life itself. Could a corpse be reanimated with electricity, as some scientists claimed? Could man, in his hubris, become a creator? Byron, to pass the time, proposed a contest. Each of them should write a ghost story. For days, Mary was plagued by a creative block. She listened to the conversations of the men, the talk of galvanism and the principle of life, and it filled her with a strange, nameless dread. And then, one night, she went to bed and could not sleep. Her imagination took hold of her. She did not just think of a ghost. She saw, in a waking dream, a pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. She saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretch out, and then, with the help of a powerful engine, show signs of life and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. She opened her eyes in terror. The nightmare was so vivid, so horrifying, that she knew she had found her story. She began writing the next day. What started as a simple ghost story for a rainy evening would become one of the most profound and enduring myths ever created by a human mind, Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus. It is a tale soaked in the grief of a young woman who understood loss intimately. Her own mother had died giving birth to her, and she had already lost a child of her own. The central, aching question of the book was born from this pain: what happens when a creature is brought into this world and then, immediately and utterly, rejected by its creator? What happens when a living thing is denied all love? And so, from a crucible of grief, genius, and a volcanic winter, a monster was born. Not just the creature in the story, but the story itself, a monstrously brilliant creation that would outlive all the poets in that villa. Now, let us step into the pages of this young woman's terrifying dream. Let us leave the rain-lashed shores of Lake Geneva and travel north, far north, into a world of endless ice and darkness, where a ship is trapped, a stranger is rescued, and a tale of unimaginable horror is about to unfold. Let us begin the story of Victor Frankenstein and his wretched creation. Let us begin, as the novel does, not with a creator, but with a captain. A captain who saw a demon on the ice. Part 1, The Blasphemous Experiment. The man rescued from the ice, a gaunt and haunted shadow of a human being, finally agreed to tell his tale to Captain Walton. His name, he revealed, was Victor Frankenstein. He came from a wealthy and loving family in Geneva, a family of extraordinary tenderness and care. His childhood, he explained, was a paradise of warmth and affection, a stark, cruel contrast to the frozen hell in which he was now found. He spoke of an idyllic youth, of a deep love for his adopted sister, Elizabeth, and of a loyal friend, Henry Clerval. He was, by his own account, not a monster, but a man shaped by the deepest love. This, he insisted, was the raw material of his soul. And this was what made the horror of what he was about to confess so utterly, devastatingly complete. He was not a creature of darkness, but a man who had been blessed, and who had thrown it all away. As a young man, Victor became consumed by a single, burning passion, to uncover the very principle of life itself. He devoured the works of the old alchemists, Paracelsus and Albertus Magnus, with a feverish intensity. When he finally attended the University of Ingolstadt, his mind, already a powder keg of ambition, was ignited by modern science. He surpassed his professors with frightening speed. He became obsessed not just with understanding the human body, but with the godlike power of bestowing life upon that which was dead. He was no longer a student, he was a fanatic, a solitary genius racing down a path from which there could be no return. The graveyards and charnel houses became his library. He forgot his family, his health, the sunlight, in his dark and blasphemous pursuit. And then, on a dreary night in November, after months of frantic, feverish labor, the moment arrived. The rain beat against the windows, and the single candle was guttering. With an anxiety that amounted to agony, Victor collected the instruments of life around him. He watched the creature at his feet, this hideous patchwork of corpse parts and stolen tissue, and channeled a spark of being into the lifeless thing. A convulsive movement agitated its limbs. It breathed hard. A yellow eye, dull and watery, slowly, horrifyingly, opened. The creature was alive. And Victor, the creator, the man who had dreamed of being a god, was instantly, irrevocably, consumed by a wave of pure, unadulterated horror and disgust. The beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled his heart. Unable to endure the sight of the being he had created, Victor fled his laboratory. He rushed into his bedroom and threw himself onto his bed, seeking the oblivion of sleep. But his dreams were a vortex of terror. He dreamt he saw Elizabeth, radiant with health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted, he embraced her, but as he imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death, her features changed, and he thought he held the corpse of his dead mother in his arms. He woke with a start, a cold sweat covering his body. And there, in the darkness of his room, the moonlight struggling to penetrate the shutters, he saw a shape. The wretch, the miserable monster whom he had created, was standing by his bedside, one hand stretched out towards him, its mouth opening in some inarticulate, horrifying attempt at speech. Victor screamed. He rushed from the house and fled into the rain-soaked streets of Ingolstadt, wandering in an agony of fear and self-loathing. The creature, his creation, his son, was alone in the apartment. By morning, it was gone. Victor, overcome by a nervous fever, collapsed. He was found and nursed back to health over many months by his dear friend, Henry Clerval, who had come to Ingolstadt to study. The monster had vanished, leaving Victor with the shattered ruins of his ambition. He tried to forget, to bury himself in the study of languages and poetry with Henry, to pretend the nightmare had never happened. But the seed of destruction had been planted. The silence from the creature was not peace. It was the calm before the storm. And the storm was about to break, not on Victor himself, but on the people he loved most in the world. Part 2, The Voice from the Darkness. A year had passed. Victor, still haunted but trying to heal, received a letter that shattered his fragile peace. His youngest brother, William, a sweet, innocent child, had been murdered. The killer had strangled the boy in the woods near Geneva. When Victor returned home, consumed by grief, he saw a flash of the creature's gigantic form illuminated by a lightning strike in the forest. He knew, instantly and with a certainty that froze his blood, that his creation was the murderer. The monster he had made was now a tangible, vengeful force. But the horror was compounded. A beloved family servant, the gentle Justine Moritz, had been found with a locket that belonged to William, and she was accused of the crime. Victor was forced to watch in silent, impotent agony as an innocent woman was convicted and executed for a murder his own creation had committed. The weight of 2 deaths now pressed down on his soul. Driven to the brink of madness by guilt and grief, Victor sought solitude in the mountains. He climbed the vast, silent glaciers of Chamonix, hoping the sublime, indifferent beauty of nature would quiet the storm inside him. But the storm followed. On the Mer de Glace, a sea of frozen waves, the creature finally confronted him. Victor, in a rage, tried to attack, but the being easily evaded him. It was not there to fight. It was there to speak. I expected this reception, the creature said, its voice a deep, gravelly rumble. All men hate the wretched. How, then, must I be hated, who am miserable beyond all living things? The Creator and his creation then retreated to a small, isolated hut on the ice. And there, in the howling wind, the monster began to tell its story. The story of how a newly born, innocent mind had learned what it meant to be human, and had been crushed by the cruelty of the world. Its first memories were not of rage, but of confusion and wonder. It was born into a world of pure sensation. It wandered, alone and terrified, into a forest, learning to distinguish light from darkness, thirst from hunger. It was a child in a monster's body, filled with a simple, aching desire for warmth and connection. It found refuge in a small hovel attached to a poor cottage in the woods. Through a crack in the wall, it began to observe a family, the de Lacy's. It watched the old, blind father play gentle music. It saw the young brother and sister, Felix and Agatha, show each other kindness and love. And as it watched, it learned. It learned to speak by listening to them teach a foreign visitor, Safie. It learned about human history, about emotion, about good and evil. It was learning, in secret, what it meant to be human, and in doing so, its own profound, crushing loneliness grew. Armed with language and a desperate hope, it decided to reveal itself. It waited until the blind old man was alone, knowing he could not be prejudiced by its horrible appearance. It began to speak, with an eloquence and gentleness that moved the old man. It was on the verge of winning its first friend, of finding a single soul who would accept it. And then, the door burst open. Felix and Agatha returned. They saw the hideous monster touching their father. The son attacked it with a stick, driving it out into the cold. The creature's last, fragile hope was shattered. It had offered nothing but love and had received only terror and violence in return. It was in that moment of pure, undiluted rejection that the innocent child born in the forest died, and the vengeful demon was born. The creature fled, its heart a crucible of pain and rage. It wandered into the woods and, in a blind fury, set fire to the empty cottage. It now understood that it would never find a place among men. But it still held one, final, desperate card. It had discovered the identity of its creator, the man who had brought it into this miserable existence and then abandoned it. It had found a journal in the pocket of the clothes it had taken from Victor's laboratory, detailing the horrific process of its creation. It knew its own origin. And now, it wanted a reckoning. Its story finished, the creature's voice changed. It was no longer a plea for understanding. It was a demand, cold, clear, and absolute. I am alone and miserable, it said. Man will not associate with me, but one as deformed and horrible as myself would not deny herself to me. My companion must be of the same species and have the same defects. This being you must create. Part 3, The Pact with the Devil. Victor Frankenstein returned from the glacier a changed man. The creature's desperate plea had burrowed into his conscience, and a heavy sense of duty replaced his earlier horror. He had created a being, and that being was now demanding his responsibility. He agreed to the creature's terms. He would make a female companion, a bride for the monster, on the condition that the two of them would then vanish from the world of men forever, seeking refuge in the wilds of South America. It was a terrible, unholy pact. The creature promised to watch him, to know if he delayed or failed. And so, Victor prepared for his second act of creation, one he hoped would undo the damage of the first. He left Geneva, telling his family he needed to travel for his studies, and set out for England with his friend Henry Clerval, a companion who knew nothing of the horror that shadowed their journey. Victor eventually parted from Henry. He needed absolute solitude for the monstrous task ahead. He traveled to a remote, windswept island in the Orkneys, a place of bleak, treeless cliffs and crashing grey seas. It was a landscape that mirrored his own desolate soul. He rented a small, wretched hut, far from any village, and turned it into a second laboratory. The work that had once been driven by a mad, creative fire was now a gruesome, soul-destroying chore. He was not building a companion, he was constructing a demon, a filthy mass, that moved and twitched under his instruments. He worked in a state of nervous, feverish anxiety, his mind forever haunted by the image of the creature watching him, waiting. Every piece of tissue he stitched, every bone he articulated, filled him not with the thrill of discovery, but with a sickening, creeping dread. The work progressed, but with every passing day, Victor's mind revolted. He began to think about the consequences of his actions. What if the two creatures hated each other? What if they could breed, creating a race of devils that would terrorize mankind? What if the female creature, once animated, was 10 times more evil than her mate, or what if she refused to abide by the pact to live in exile? He looked at the half-finished, terrifying form on the table before him, and a wave of pure, moral revulsion swept over him. The creature, his original creation, suddenly appeared at the window, its yellow eyes watching him with a triumphant, expectant glee. The sight was the final push Victor needed. He could not do this. He could not be responsible for unleashing another such monster upon the world. A decision, swift and final, seized him. As the creature watched, Victor grabbed the half-formed female body and, with a strength born of pure, desperate conviction, tore it limb from limb. The bones cracked, the flesh yielded, and the promise of a new life was reduced to a bloody, unrecognizable mess on the cold stone floor. A howl of pure, demoniac despair echoed from outside the hut. The creature had witnessed the destruction of its last hope. Victor, trembling and nauseous, had broken the pact. He had chosen to face the wrath of his creation rather than risk the future of humanity. The creature's face, pressed against the glass, was no longer one of eager hope. It was a mask of pure, undiluted, and bottomless hatred. It raised a fist and screamed a single, chilling promise into the howling wind, a promise that would ring in Victor's ears until the day he died: "I will be with you on your wedding night." The creature disappeared into the storm. Victor, left alone with the bloody remains of his second creation, was consumed by a paralyzing fear. The threat was not against his own life, but against the life of Elizabeth, his beloved, his promised bride. The creature knew how to wound him most deeply. He cleaned the laboratory, packed the evidence of his crime into a basket, and rowed out onto the black, restless sea to sink it into the depths. Exhausted and adrift, he fell asleep in the boat and woke to find himself drifting far from his island. He eventually made it to a small Irish town, only to be met with a new, sickening horror. A man had been murdered the previous night, and the body had been found on the beach. Victor was seized, accused of the crime, and marched to the town hall to see the corpse. The face he saw was not a stranger's. It was the cold, lifeless face of his best friend, Henry Clerval. The creature had struck again, and the law now believed Victor was the monster. Part 4, The Promise Fulfilled and the Chase into the Ice. Victor was eventually acquitted of the murder of Henry Clerval. The evidence was clear that he had been on the Orkney Island at the time of the killing. But the legal innocence meant nothing. His soul was drowning in a triple guilt: William, Justine, and now his dearest friend. He returned to Geneva, a spectral figure, and prepared for his marriage to Elizabeth. He no longer saw it as a promise of joy, but as a death sentence. The creature's vow, "I will be with you on your wedding night," echoed ceaselessly in his mind. He interpreted it as his own death warrant, and he prepared to face his creation in one final, desperate struggle. He armed himself with pistols and a dagger, and on the night of the wedding, at an inn by the lake, he left Elizabeth alone in their room to confront the monster. He told her it was a precaution, an evil he expected to face alone. He paced the corridors and the grounds, his pistols drawn, expecting the creature to burst from the shadows at any moment. The hours passed in agonizing silence. The inn was still. He began to believe, with a desperate, irrational hope, that perhaps he had been wrong. Perhaps the monster's threat was an empty one. Then, a scream shattered the night. It was not a masculine cry of battle, but a piercing, feminine shriek of pure, undiluted terror. It came from his wedding chamber. The horrific truth crashed down upon him. He had been a fool. The creature's promise had never been about his own life. The monster intended to destroy Victor's world, not by killing him, but by taking everything he loved. He had left Elizabeth alone, and now his creation had found her. He rushed back to the chamber and flung open the door. The scene inside was one of utter, senseless ruin. Elizabeth, his beautiful, innocent wife, lay motionless across the bed. Her white dress was stained crimson. Her golden hair was wild, and her face, once so full of life and love, was now frozen in a final, eternal expression of terror. The life had been strangled out of her. And there, at the open window, framed against the cold, pale moonlight, was the silhouette of the creature. It turned its head slowly. A ghastly, triumphant grin was spread across its hideous features. It pointed one long, dark finger at the body on the bed, and then, with a final, mocking laugh, it vanished into the night. Victor's world was over. The monster had won. There was nothing left for Victor but revenge. The love that had anchored him was gone, replaced by a single, burning, all-consuming hatred. He was no longer a man, but a force of pure vengeance. He gathered weapons and began a pursuit that would stretch across continents and into the most desolate places on earth. The creature, as if playing a cruel game, would taunt him from a distance, leaving clues, whispering in the shadows, always staying just ahead. The chase led him across the Mediterranean, through the Black Sea, into the frozen wastes of Russia. Victor was driven by a superhuman fury, ignoring exhaustion, hunger, and the brutal cold. He followed the monster into the Arctic, into a world of endless night and howling wind, where no man could survive. It was there, at the very edge of existence, that Captain Walton and his crew found him, a dying, raving skeleton of a man, still chasing a shadow across the ice. Epilogue: The Final Confession and the Fire on the Ice. Victor's story, the confession he poured out to Captain Walton, ended here, on the frozen ship. His last wish, his dying command to the captain, was to continue the pursuit. He demanded that Walton, if the creature survived, would take up his sword of revenge. But Victor's body, ravaged by exhaustion and grief, could not sustain his burning hate. He died, quietly, his last words a strange mixture of self-pity and a warning against the demon of ambition. Walton found the creature standing over Victor's body, a monstrous, grieving silhouette. There was no triumph in its posture, only a crushing, desolate sorrow. It confessed to Walton that its revenge had brought it no peace, only an agony of remorse. It had murdered the innocent, and in doing so, had murdered its own chance at peace. With a final, terrible howl of grief, the creature declared its intention to travel to the farthest north, to build its own funeral pyre, and to at last find rest in the flames. It leapt from the ship onto the ice, was carried away on a floating raft, and was lost in the darkness. The pursuit was finally, and utterly, over. And so, the story of Victor Frankenstein and his creature ends not with a triumphant victory, but with two broken beings consumed by the same destructive fire. Mary Shelley, the 18-year-old girl who dreamed this nightmare into being, did not write a simple monster story. She wrote a profound tragedy about what happens when we create without love, and when we judge by appearance rather than by the heart. The creature was born innocent, reaching for connection, and was twisted into a demon by the world's relentless cruelty. Victor, blessed with everything, threw it all away for a godlike ambition, and then refused to take responsibility for what he had made. They were bound together by pain, and together they were destroyed. I am Melesias. This has been the story of Frankenstein, as I have understood it. Thank you for listening. If this dark and tragic journey has moved you, please subscribe. And remember, the real monster is never the one who looks different. It is the one who refuses to love. Until next time.